In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to build the best gaming PC you can put together for a $1,200 budget right now. Perfect for playing all the latest titles at 1080p and 1440p maximum settings with some great frame rates. This build ticks a lot of boxes. I'll be walking you through the GPU, CPU and every component in between, how to put the system together and taking a look at performance a little bit later. Let's do this. The brand new NZXT C1000 provides loads of power in a compact form factor, with a fully modular interface and a high 80+ gold efficiency rating. It's easy to install in your next build, and well future-proof for higher wattages of next-gen GPUs. The C1000 joins a range of great 80+ gold PSUs with a wattage for everyone. Learn more about the C1000 at the first links in the description below. Now, I appreciate the desk is just a little bit cluttered, so let me go ahead and remove the case, which is actually a brand new design from Cooler Master, more on that later, and start things off by looking at our CPU and GPU combo. Now, the processor and graphics card are easily the two most important components in a gaming PC. Of course, all the others are very important in their own rights, but these are the two parts which will really define the kind of performance and frame rates you can expect to see in all the latest titles. At the heart of the system is the Gigabyte RTX 3060Ti. This is an 8GB graphics card that boasts all of Nvidia's latest RT cores for ray tracing and DLSS. You get plenty of CUDA cores for fast outright render performance, all in a nice 2-fan budget-oriented Eagle OC cooler. Gigabyte are always really strong when it comes to their budget and mid-range choices, and this is actually one of the cheapest 3060 Ti's on the market. It makes a lot of sense for what we're doing here, and we can also expect to see some price drops on cards like these when the rumoured 4000 series, or whatever Nvidia calls them, inevitably drops later this year. GPU prices though are already at a bit of a rock bottom. They're at the lowest point I've seen in the last two and a half years now, and these 30 series cards still provide fantastic performance. And as such, waiting for the next gen might not always be the smartest shout, at least for a build with a $1,200 budget like this one. The best CPU you can choose to pair with this graphics card is Intel's Core i5 12400 or 12400F. The only difference is that the F chip doesn't have any graphics built in. We don't need this anyway, as we have of course got a dedicated GPU. With 6 of Intel's performance cores, none of their efficiency cores but 12 threads, it is perfect for multi-threaded performance and has a single core boost clock speed of up to 4.4 GHz, meaning a couple of your threads are going to run at up to 4.4 GHz out of the box. Of course, if you're after more clock speed, an overclockable chip could be the way to go, but this is going to deliver great performance when paired with our 3060 Ti. I'll be installing our i5 12400F into a nice budget-oriented motherboard from Gigabyte that's definitely got a few features up its sleeve that are going to impress for a build like this. This is their B660DS3H, a full-size ATX board with the new LGA 1700 socket for our Intel 12th gen processors, PCIe Generation 4 support, plenty of PCIe lanes, and importantly, the inclusion of Wi-Fi. Now, motherboards as standard on the budget end don't come with networking included. You'll get an Ethernet port, but no wireless connectivity. That can be a real pain, and aftermarket USB dongles are just a bit crap. So go for something with Wi-Fi on for another $20, $25, and I'll link both the options, the Wi-Fi and non-Wi-Fi versions, down below. We must have covered off installing a CPU a million times on the channel now, but in case you're not familiar, you want to find the golden triangle on the processor and match this up with the triangle on the bottom left corner of your CPU socket. Drop it in with an Intel chip very gently so you don't bend the pins on the motherboard, pop the cover down, and then you can seat it into place with the retention arm. I'll be coming back onto the cooler in a moment, because first I think it's going to be easier if we whack in our M.2 and RAM choices for this build. Now, these are our two forms of storage today. The top is what we call a short-term storage, holding all the data that our CPU needs to process to complete all of its little tasks, and the second, our long-term storage, the NVMe SSD that we'll be installing all of our games on, our Windows operating system, and just about everything in between. For those of you more price-conscious buyers, I would actually recommend just sticking with an SSD as your primary form of storage. Of course, if you want more space, an extra hard drive can be a good shout later down the line, but for us today, I think the standalone 1TB XPG S20G is going to do the job nicely. This is a Gen 3 NVMe drive, giving us speeds in the region of 2-3 gigabytes per second. That's around half of what you'll find from a newer Gen 4 drive, but around 5 times the speed you'll find with an older SATA drive. So a perfect middle ground that isn't going to break the bank. Screw that down, nice and easy, just be gentle with it, then we can move on to the memory. I've picked up a 16 gig kit of Corsair's Vengeance RGB RS. This RAM is a very low profile kit, great for adding in a big air cooler. You also get an RGB strip up top, which is addressable and you can customize in software, and the whole thing is just a really nice, well-timed, affordable kit of memory. The reason I've gone for a DDR4 kit for our build rather than DDR5, our CPU actually supports both, is just because DDR5 is too expensive. The RAM itself is quite pricey, the timings are still a little bit slow, and for a budget build, spending $100 for essentially no more performance is never a good thing. Even if DDR5 did give us another 10%, for that $100, that money would be better spent on a more powerful GPU. A CPU or GPU upgrade is always going to do more than a RAM upgrade, as long as your RAM is not creating a physical bottleneck for the rest of the system. AKA, don't take my advice, install 4 gigs in this build and go, James, I'm only getting 8 frames per second. It's because you need about 8, preferably 16 for a build like this to avoid bottlenecking, but any more is, frankly, a little overkill. The final thing to install onto the motherboard now, before we go and look at our new snazzy Cooler Master case, which I'm quite excited for, is our cooler. Now, Cooler Master's Hyper 212 RGB lineup, or the non-RGB as it was prior to that, has been a bit of a mainstay in the PC building space for basically as long as I've been around, which is not an eternity, but it's also not a particularly small amount of time either. The 212 Evo back in the day and the 212 Dual were a mainstay here on the channel, and they've refreshed those lineups with an RGB gunmetal grey version that looks awesome. And the reason it's so popular, aside from being pretty good at cooling, is that it's actually very cheap and very affordable, which makes it a really great entry-level option. Having a CPU cooler in this build isn't strictly necessary. You could stick with the included Intel stock cooler, but it is going to be loud. It's a little bit ugly, and it probably will stop our CPU from hitting those max boost clock speeds as much as possible. So a cooler in this sense is going to give you some free performance, but don't spend too much money, as anything particularly fancy is probably going to be a waste. Now, taking a look at the cooler, it looks to me like we've already got some mounting hardware pre-installed. The question is it AMD or Intel? One easy way to check is to just pop our cooler onto the motherboard. Yeah, that's not going to work. If you take a look at where the screws are on the brackets and the holes on the motherboard, they're in different places. So let me swap these out for the right brackets, add our backplate through, then we can go ahead and properly install the cooler this time around. The fan can wait till later, as that's going to make installing the motherboard a lot harder if we clip it on now. We're going to move it over into the case next, which is this, the Cooler Master CMP520. Now, it is a little bit bland. There's a few things off the bat so far I'm not a massive fan of. The single-use PCIe lanes are a little bit of a flop. The front panel I/O is also a little bit weak. It's got one USB 3, one USB 2. It can't have been that much more expensive just to have 2 USB 3s, surely? USB 2 in an age of USB-C seems like a bit of a cop-out, I'm not gonna lie. Let's take this front panel off. It is all mesh though, which is a nice improvement. Some nice Cooler Master RGB fans, a little bit plastic fantastic, but for the budget price point that this case is hopefully gonna aim itself, it's one of those sacrifices that in theory makes sense because it gives you more money for your graphics card and other components. I'm gonna strip the whole thing down, go ahead and slide the motherboard in, screwing this into place. All the standoffs will be in the right place as well, on the basis is an ATX case and an ATX motherboard, and we can also add on, while we're here, our CPU cooler fan to complete things nicely. A nice budget-oriented chassis that shouldn't break the bank, so hopefully the pricing on this stays nice and low, but up-to-date pricing can be found at the links below. Now then, we can go ahead and install the graphics card I talked about earlier. If you'd like to see just how well this performs, hold your horses, because we'll be looking at that very shortly in the benchmarks portion of the video. Now, we will of course be installing this into the very top PCI slot, the grey slot on our motherboard. If we push the clip back, we want to hover the graphics card over the slot we'll be using, and that's going to give us an indication as to which of the rear PCI lanes we need to remove. Now, in this instance, it's slots 2 and slots 3. As I say, Cooler Master, I am really disappointed. These aren't screw-in reusable slots. These single-use ones are a bit rubbish, and it means if you change your graphics card or your motherboard later, and you suddenly need need to fill different slots, it's a bit of a headache. As if that wasn't bad enough, if you take out the wrong slot by accident, you then end up with this hole. Now, you will get a couple of spare ones you can pop in, but it would be easier if these were all the reusable ones in the first instance. If we push the retention clip back, then we can hover our graphics card over once more, line it up with the slot, apply a bit of pressure, boom, and it's going to click in nice and easily. We're going to add a screw in to secure it down and stop it from doing basically that. And that's going to fasten our GPU into place and make way for the next and final step of the build, popping in our power supply, the Corsair CX650F. This is an 80 plus bronze certified semi-modular power supply. It's got an RGB fan on, which might add a little bit of something to the build, although admittedly is not the most important feature ever. It's got a semi-fanless design as well, keeping the fan nice and quiet when the unit's not under heavy load, and a fully modular interface, meaning you only plug in the cables you actually need to use. If you take a look, you do get quite a wide variety included in the box as standard, which I will admit for a first time builder may be a little bit complicated. Flick your power supply over to the underside and locate your motherboard power connections. Pop one of those into the power supply. We also then want to find one of these bad boys. This is a dual 6+2 pin PCIe power harness for our graphics card. The CPU power connection is up next. That's a single 4+4 pin, 8 pin connection. Pop that in. And then also we're going to add in a SATA power connection. This is to power up any of our fans or anything like that. And we can pop that into the power supply too. Plug all of these up to your motherboard. CPU to the top left, motherboard to the far right hand side, GPU to the graphics card, and then any SATA or Molex cables around the rear, and slide the power supply in, screwing it down with one screw in each corner. 4 screws in total. And then once that's done, we can go ahead, boot the system up, and take a look at the performance of this build. Starting off with a little bit of Battlefield 2042, and walking through to the likes of Fortnite and Apex Legends as we go. In Battlefield 2042, when testing at 4K high settings with DLSS enabled, and set to performance mode specifically, we pulled in just shy of 110 frames per second on average. 109 to be precise. This was around 20 to 30 frames more than what we achieved with DLSS disabled, with a very, very minimal visual fidelity hit. It was a similarly positive story in Spider-Man, where at 1440p high once again, we this time managed to pull in over 100 FPS, nearly 110 frames per second to be precise. Spider-Man Remastered as a game is awesome, it's got support for all the latest game tech, and the graphics are fantastic. Plus, the storyline is sick as well. What's not to love? And this PC handling it like a dream. Talking of like a dream and awful segues, Apex Legends next up at 1440p, and we tested here at high settings. We achieved over 150 FPS, 154 to be precise, breaking that all-important 140 FPS cap that you'll often find yourself hitting in Apex Legends. It was a similarly positive story in Valorant, the next game today, where the frame rate supercharged to levels you've probably not seen in a long time. At 1440p high, you'd expect the frame rate to be okay, but with all the settings maxed, that surely has to have a hit, right? Not really. 435 frames per second on average was absolutely crazy. We got some fantastic results. Visually, the game looked great. And I'm not being funny, you could definitely push this to 4K and still well surpass the refresh rate of your monitor in terms of frame rate achieved. Finally, to wrap things up, we also tested out Fortnite 1080p competitive settings in this one with everything tuned down to low except the render distance, which was set to far. We pulled in over 200 frames per second, 202 to be precise, with solid 90 and 99 percentile results. All of our frame rates were tested with both NVIDIA FrameView and MSI Afterburner's Reaver Tuner to ensure maximum fairness. And with that, that just about wraps it up for this video. Get subscribed to see more from us. Drop a comment with any questions you've got. Thanks for watching though, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.